Hey guys, Zack here, and this is my review of Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated. Okay, so this episode, Scarebear, is interesting in that this episode is kind of one of the first real instances where the old Mystery Incorporated tries to take the new Mystery Incorporated out by trying to get their pieces of the Planet Spirit disc. This is where ultimately boils down to them trying to fight over it, because now in the episode as has been established, the old Mystery Incorporated, they have 3 pieces. The new Mystery Incorporated, they have 3 pieces, and now they're just fighting over that. And also there just so happens to be a thing with a mutant bear, and that's what the main flaw of the episode is. But in case the episode does open up with Sheriff Stone actually taking Mayor Nettles on a romantic date to an old campground that, as we find out, is heavily irradiated and completely and utterly destroyed. And of course, he then proceeds to pull everything. He then proceeds to actually pull his smoker on, and they're both wearing gas masks. And he then proceeds to explain, and she does proceed to point out that it's actually quite a dump, and she's surprised that her father used to bring him there. But he merely responds that yeah, he did come there a lot when he was a kid, but also points out that it's been quite a while since he's actually been there, and does point out that in the time since that, it has actually been completely ravaged by Destroido, as we find out. It is the surrounding wilderness, and it is now filled with mutant creatures and a whole bunch of other nasty things. And of course, Mayor Nettles is appalled by the fact that Destroido seems to have destroyed so much land. But he merely but Sheriff Stone points out that points out that obviously Destroido would obviously be the only one who would do this. And it was implied in a previous episode. It was implied that they were huge polluters who did not care. But this episode just further confirms that, showing that they have apparently just destroyed the environment around their business to the point where it's practically dead. And yeah, that's just a sign that pollution is just a real problem that we need to deal with. Because obviously it's the Mystery Incorporated takes that to its logical extreme by showing an actual company just destroying it without any regard for the rules. But of course Sheriff Stone merely points out that that's just what the price they have to pay for progress, and then proceeds to prepare a smoker when suddenly the titular Scarebear of the episode just suddenly appears out of nowhere, and not only kicks Sheriff Stone's smoker into a tree, but also proceeds to chase him and Janet Nettles off the land. And they quickly panic and immediately run off and back to the town hall. At which point they call the new Mystery Incorporated, and proceed to fill him in about what exactly is going on. They then proceed to explain the Scarebear about how it's a large mutant bear that has been stalking around Destroido's land, and they point out that obviously it's been causing a lot of problems. And Fred accurately deduces that it's a mutant bear, pointing out that the width of the shoulders is a lot bigger than what they would normally be facing. And of course Mayor Nettles points out that she doesn't really care if it's a mutant bear or not, as long as Mystery Incorporated takes care of it. And she then proceeds to explain how they need Mystery Incorporated to deal with it specifically, because as it turns out, and this is why they're able to get around the rules, but as it turns out, Destroido Corporation declared itself a sovereign nation, which essentially means it's a sovereign company. It doesn't have to listen to any rules other than its own, and for that reason, Sheriff Stone has never actually gone in and arrested anybody for all of the horrible things they've done, because he can't. He's legally not able to. So, yeah, for that reason, he's unable to arrest anybody for any of the things they've done. They're a sovereign nation. Nothing can do anything with that. And of course, Shaggy immediately points out the problem with having to go in on their own without any sort of police aid. And he even points out, and even though that hasn't stopped them before, and does proceed to point out that this seems like a bad idea, but the rest of Mystery Incorporated just kind of cheer on the fact that they're able to do a little bit of vigilante detective work, and they all agree to go do the case, except for Shaggy and Scooby, who are obviously on the fence about the whole deal. And of course, meanwhile, we do find out that the new Mystery Incorporated and the old Mystery Corp, the old Mystery Incorporated, they've, as I said, they figured out exactly what's been going on. That's they have 3 pieces of the Planet Spirit that they each Mystery Incorporated has 3 pieces of the Planet Spirit disc, and proceeds to, and of course Mr. E asks the rest of the group if they understand what that means, and Brad and Judy of course point out that it means that they have each have 3 pieces of the Planet Spirit disc, but of course Professor Pericles merely calls them stupid and points out that it means a lot more than that, and that obviously they can't do anything with only 3 pieces, so they need the remaining 3 pieces to actually, complete the Planet Spirit disc and use it for its intended purpose. And of course Brad and Judy and of course he points out that the main thing they need to do is figure out which member of Mystery Incorporated actually has the piece of the Planet Spirit disc so that they can take it from them. And of course, Brad and Judy pointing out that openly agreed to do that, pointing out that taking the piece of the Planet Spirit disc away from Fred would keep him safe, and pointing out that they obviously that's obviously their idea of putting him first, which is apparently what Cassidy was talking about or in a previous episode. That they obviously do not actually put people first. They thought that Fred, they think that by taking the piece of the Planet Spirit disc away from Fred, they think they're keeping him safe. They don't want him having the pieces of the Planet Spirit disc because they think they're dangerous. So yeah, that kind of sheds a little bit of light on their parenting style about how they seem to think that Fred isn't able to handle himself, so they're just going to baby him. But to the point where they're just going to break in and steal an important thing that they have. But and of course, it's at this point where Brad points out that he does have one hiccup about whether or not Cassidy will be a problem, and Professor Pericles merely averts his gaze, and Mr. E tells them that Cassidy isn't going to be a problem anymore, alluding to the fact that she's dead. So yeah, she's very much not going to be a problem. But of course, with that, they then proceed to get ready to go and get ready to steal the piece of the Planet Spirit disc. What we find out is that. Is that it's this point where the Mystery Incorporated then proceed to all get the new Mystery Incorporated. They all proceed to gear up in hazmat suits so they can go and investigate Destroido Corporation's land. And of course they start poking around because obviously it's going to keep them safe from all the radiation or whatever else that's out there. Obviously Destroido Corporation has completely destroyed the land to the point where they're not able to actually go in and out of the place and actually go and protect the keep the environment safe. So obviously they just need hazmat suits to do their job right now. But in any case, as they're walking around, Daphne does note about how pretty the moon is, and she and Fred have a bit of a moment where Fred points out that they actually at one point studied the moon so long that they actually developed what the doctors actually called moon blindness, and eventually the doctors did wind up fixing them, but yeah, they developed moon blindness from staring at the moon too long, which apparently is a thing. I know sun blindness is a thing. If you stare too long at the sun, you'll eventually ruin your eyes, but I don't think the moon works the same way. It's a reflection of the sun's rays. It's not directly creating rays itself. I don't think that's how that works, but it's a funny gag for the episode, so I'll allow it. But in any case, as they're walking away, Daphne and then later Daphne winds up falling into a river, and Fred winds up falling in after her, trying to pull her out, and eventually they manage to emerge when they notice that the river is glowing, and they immediately ask Velma to analyze, and Velma does. She pulls out a flask, and she scoops everything up in a test tube, and after running some tests, concludes that it is in fact lithium that they fell in. The river is just pure lithium. She then proceeds to, and of course it's at this point where Daphne wonders if this is actually what Destroido has been mining out here, and Velma concludes that it is in fact a very real possibility, and confirms that she is in fact going to have to continue to do some research and get more samples, but she does think she can actually research it. But it's at this point where the Scarebear actually shows up and proceeds to chase them off the land. And of course he then proceeds to go on a rampage. The Scarebear proceeds to go on a rampage and scares them all off. And they start running off and trying to get far away from the Scarebear as possible. And eventually go over a river and over the falls. And then proceed to actually land on the other side of the falls. And the Scarebear, satisfied, proceeds to leave them alone and goes back to what it was doing. At which point the Mystery Incorporated pick themselves back up and start investigating and quickly note footprints laying on the ground, which they then proceed to follow and eventually see what they believe is to be the Scarebear. But then it's revealed that it's actually George Avocados, who has been in the background of a couple of episodes, but this is his second prominent role. And what we find, and he's annoyed about the fact that the Mist Gang is actually on his land, and we do find out why. He goes on to explain why he doesn't like them on his land, because as we find out, they actually kind of ruined his life a little bit. As we find out, obviously he ran for mayor back in season 1. He tried to run for mayor. And what we find out is that it did not go well after they exposed his father for diamond theft. Apparently, after that, his reputation got dragged in the mud alongside his father's. He was unable to actually run for mayor anymore because his reputation has been besmirched, and he's more or less just been on his family's avocado farm, just picking avocados. Although, as we find out, he's not having a good go of that. Because as it turns out, and this is very visually demonstrated, but apparently the avocados have mutated as an exposure to lithium. Case in point, one of the avocados then proceeds to fall off the tree, and then proceeds to grow spider limbs and starts crawling around, which Velma cites is most likely not normal avocado behavior. And of course, George does point out that obviously he knows that's not normal behavior, but he also points out that Destroido, that he's been trying to go to Destroido to actually get some information and try and get them to clean up their mess. But what we find out is that they won't let anybody on Destroido property, citing the fact that he needs a Destroido passport to get in and out of Destroido property. But the only way he can actually get a passport is by going into Destroido and getting a passport, because that's the only way they'll be issued. And then proceeds to reiterate that he wants the gang off of his property, and eventually realizing that they're annoying him, they proceed to leave. But in the process, they wonder what exactly it is that's going on with the Scarebear, and what exactly is going on with avocados. At which point Scooby starts facing down with a mutant avocado and chases it and tries to scare it off, and in the process discovers a security badge for Destroido Corporation, which Daphne picks up and points out that it seems like they now have full access to the labs of Destroido Corporation, and now they can actually do some research. At which point, it's at this point where we find out that the old Mystery Incorporated, they have decided to actually break into Velma's house as a thing to actually try and figure out who has a piece of the Planet Spirit Disc. And what we find out is that they actually have their own version of the Mystery Machine. It's called the Enigma Engine, which is a reference to old German machines that would actually, and it makes sense given Pericles' old proclivity for German things, and he was a member of the original Mystery Incorporated. But basically the Enigma machine was a machine that you typed in a thing, and it would just spit out a random number and a random thing, and it was a way to actually encode information. And Germans used it during World War II, which makes sense again, given that Pericles has a whole German thing going on. But it is a fun little reference. But in case they're in the Enigma engine, and Mr. Ede uses a satellite on top of the Enigma engine to actually block out any cell phone signals, and then asks Professor Pericles to sense if he can actually see the pieces of the Planet Spirit Disc, since according to Pericles, they actually give off a unique signature that can be picked up using special technology that he developed. And of course he puts on a pair of goggles, which wind up turning into another satellite thing on top of the van. But what we quickly find out is that apparently the Enigma machine, apparently he can't find anything, so they send Brad and Judy to go look for it, and they wind up dressing up in what are eventually revealed to be camouflage suits, and they proceed to break into Velma's house, and start looking around trying to find evidence of the planet disc, and do eventually find Velma's room and start poking around, and also stop for a brief moment to stop their search to admire the picture that Velma has of the gang together on her desk, and to point out that Fred looks very cute in the picture. But then as they're looking into it, Mystery Incorporated, the new Mystery Incorporated comes in, and Brad and Judy immediately get into full camo mode and immediately camouflage themselves to turn themselves invisible so that Mystery Incorporated doesn't see them. But of course what we find out is apparently, conveniently enough, Velma just kind of has lab gear. Once we find out, she just has lab equipment because, as she points out, A, she can't wear a sweater all the time, and B, she uses it for testing and other things, so, because she's the smart one, so of course she has a couple of spare lab coats, but she points out that it helps keep chemicals off when she's doing experiments by herself, so she keeps a couple of them handy, and does point out that they now have what they need to actually sneak into into Destroido Labs, but also what we find out is that now they need something to actually break into Destroido Labs using what they believe to be an experiment, and they then proceed to rack their brain for ideas, and eventually realize that they can just use Scooby since he's a talking dog, and that in and of itself is not a normal occurrence, or at least weird enough that they can actually pass it off as a mutation, and they don't really explain why Scooby can talk. I don't think ever in the series, but it is an interesting thing that they just point out the fact that Scooby can talk and use that as an excuse to actually sneak into Destroido Labs, and of course Brad and Judy, who heard this whole conversation because they used camo suits to hide themselves, come back to the Enigma engine and proceed to tell Mr. E and Pericles what's going on about how the group is planning to sneak into the Destroido Corporation, and Professor Pericles both Professor Pericles and Mr. E's ears perk up since they quickly realize that they can actually use the fact that Mr. E owns Destroido Corporation to their advantage. Since again, Mr. E is secretly the owner of Destroido Corporation, he can easily set a trap for them and keep them detained in Destroido Corporation long enough for them to search for the pieces of the planet's spirit disk. And of course, that is indeed the plan. Mr. Incorporated then proceed to sneak into the Destroido Corporation and do successfully sneak into the lab area of the Destroido Corporation. They proceed to sneak into the lab undercover because obviously nobody's going to question the fact that they have a pass and are at least dressed the part, and they have a talking dog. So it's not like anybody's going to question that. And of course, they then proceed to poke around in Destroido Corporation, and what we find out is that there is in fact a wing inside Destroido that's just catalogs all the weird mutations that their pollution has caused. And what we find out is that they just have various mutated animals in cages. You've got a cat with human hands, which is weird. A mutant owl thing that's we've seen a couple of times, and Scooby and Shaggy just kind of sneer away from it. They don't want anything to do with it. But and also a couple other things, including mutated bats and birds, and just a whole bunch of other weird combinations of things. It is just a really weird thing. But eventually they wind up at a high-tech security door, which Fred points out that they can easily crack into because it points out that it'll take some time to actually access the password. But it's at this point where the rest of the gang quickly realize that it's just unlocked, and then somebody just, I forget who, but somebody just pushes the door open, and Fred realizes he's just being silly by pointing out that not realizing that it was unlocked. At which point they walk into the security room, and they look around for a bit, and quickly discover that somebody is actually uploading something to destroy from the Destroido servers onto a separate server. They quickly discover that somebody's uploading video evidence and other things that are stored on the Destroido server, and she immediately starts trying to figure out what exactly is going on with it, and tries to see if she can unencrypt the files, but but she causes the power to actually trip by accident, and she tries to reboot it. But then somebody comes in, and the gang has to hide, and we meet a man named Benson Furman, who is actually the security guard for Destroido Corporation. He immediately walks in. He checks the monitors because he notices that something is off about them. And then immediately goes in and gets a call from and goes to go check the monitors when he discovers he has a pending call from Mr. E, who then proceeds to tell him that he's got intelligence of a possible break-in and that they need to lock down the wing. And Furman points out that obviously they can't be breaking that obviously there's already still several scientists there and that they can't just lock down the building. But Mr. E merely tells him to set up to kind of go in and give everybody free all access passes to the salad bar, and tells him that it will probably be fine. And since Mr. E is his boss, Furman really has no real choice but to lock down the security wing and goes into a full red alert. And of course, this is this point where the rest of the gang quickly realize that they need to get out of the building as quickly as possible. And immediately start trying to make their way to the exit. But then the Scarebear suddenly emerges from the wall, quite literally just rips a hole in the wall and starts chasing them, through the hallways of the Destroido Corporation, which winds up subverting the usual hallway antics that you would see in a regular Scooby-Doo show. There is in fact a hallway scene where they're sneaking into the hallways, but they're only hiding in the one. And the bear is just ripping through doors Scarebear is just ripping through doors to try and find them, and he eventually doesn't, and eventually the gang is able to get away from him, and he picks up on the fact that they're sneaking past him, so he immediately turns around and tries chasing them again. At which point Scooby lets out some of the mutant animals, which then proceed to chase off Scarebear, and Scarebear retreats back into the building, and Fred praises Scooby for his quick thinking, and the rest of the gang immediately return back to the mystery machine, and then point out the very obvious thing that they've learned, which is that the Scarebear has access to the facility. It's able to get in and out of the facility, which means it either works for Destroido or somebody who can get in and out of the property. But of course, it's this point where they see somebody coming, and Fred tells everybody to duck and hide. And what we find out is that we actually see George Avocados leaving Destroido Corporation, which obviously implies that he lied and that he wasn't able to actually get on and off of Destroido property. And they do point out that it seems like that he may be a firm candidate for the Scarebear. And do point out that maybe that if he's lying about being on Destroido, not being able to be on Destroido property, that he's likely lying about being the Scarebear as well. And then immediately go to Crystal Cove Town Hall to tell Sheriff Stone what they found, only to discover that Mr. E is there waiting for him. And this is I think the first time ever that the gang has actually seen Mr. E in the flesh. For the most part, he's either sent them videos, or at least this is the first time the full gang has actually seen him. We know that Velma has at least seen Mr. E. We know she's at least, but the rest of the gang definitely not. They've never seen Mr. E in the flesh before. This is the first time he's actually confronted them personally. And of course, he then proceeds to go on to the next stage of his plan, which is that now that he's pointed out that there was an obvious break-in at Destroido Corporation, he goes to Sheriff Stone, using his original name as an alias, which isn't smart, but yeah, he introduces himself as Ricky Owens to Sheriff Stone, and does point out that he's actually, or at least Mr. Owens is what his name is, but he introduces himself as Mr. Owens, and he does tell Sheriff Stone that Mystery Incorporated had actually been on his property and he wants them arrested. And of course, Sheriff Stone seemingly is willing to do exactly that. But then Mayor Nettle stops him, pointing out that obviously they don't have any seeming evidence to that fact. At which point, Mr. E then proceeds to pull a CD out of his pocket with a security footage on it, and to point out that he does have such evidence. But of course, at this point, where Mayor Nettles then covers it up by pointing out that apparently Sheriff Stone doesn't have a CD player, which Sheriff Stone initially doesn't realize what she's doing at first, and does point out that he actually does have a CD player. But then she steps on his foot and gives him a look, and he quickly realizes what she's doing, and then decides to play along and tells Mr. E that he was wrong about the CD player, and unfortunately he's not going to be able to take the CD into evidence. And annoyed, Mr. E then proceeds to leave, but not before telling the rest of Mystery Incorporated that this isn't over, and proceeds to leave and gets into his car, where where Professor Pericles is waiting for him, and proceeds to explain what happened about how he went into the police station, but points out that obviously Sheriff Stone wasn't interested in arresting the kids, so for that reason proceeds to point out that they're going to have to take more drastic measures, and Professor Pericles actually perks up at that, pointing out that he's more than happy to take more drastic measures against the kids, since obviously they're starting to become a pain in the ass, and he points out that he isn't particularly happy with how much they're interfering with their plans. At which point they proceed to drive off. Meanwhile, inside of the Crystal Cove police station, they proceed to explain everything they've seen, and Sheriff Stone then proceeds to go on to explain his own personal theory, which is that obviously it was the Scarebear who uploaded the thing. He points out that obviously whoever the Scarebear is, it would have to have been somebody who had access to Destroido Corporation, would have been able to get in to actually upload the videos to a private server, and of course would have had to have full access to do any of that. So he points out that it has to have been somebody from Destroido. Even though Marinelle's just questioned his logic a little bit, pointing out that obviously it's a mutant bear that shouldn't, and therefore would not have the higher intelligence to actually tap away at a keyboard. But of course, Fred points out that it may in fact not be an actual mutant bear, but pointing out instead that it may in fact be George Avocados, and pointing out that he was seen at Destroido Corporation, and points out that he does have a personal vendetta against Destroido for ruining his avocado crops. So he points out that it very well could be him. But of course, they do need to actually figure out a way to actually catch him in the act. At which point, Marinellos does point out that Destroido Corporation holds a charity ball for all of its victims, and points out that obviously that would be the perfect chance to actually catch Destroido in the act, to catch Avocados in the act of actually destroying Destroido Corporation. And of course, they're more than happy. And of course, it's at this point where they point out that where Fred points out that he's very happy about that, mainly because it means that he gets to do what he does best, and that's build a trap. And proceeds to explain how he's actually able to because that'll be actually the perfect way to actually trap somebody. But in any case, they then proceed to go to the charity ball, where of course Fred is very much in the zone, and he's very much building a Rube Goldberg machine to actually trap the Scarebear with. And of course, what we find out is that Velma very much admires when Fred is actually in the zone and building his own traps, and Daphne adds to that, pointing out that she wishes he would be in the zone with her, and letting it slip that she has in fact redeveloped the romantic feelings for Fred. And when Velma asks if they're actually together again, she merely points out that they're not, but at least not yet, and isn't entirely sure if they'll ever be together again. But does pointing out that obviously he isn't entirely focused on her, and she points out that obviously that's not really going to change anytime soon. So for the time being, she's just happy to just be friends with him, but she implies that she wants something more. At which point Fred actually hollers to Daphne, pointing out that he needs spatulas for the trap, and she does pull in the spatula. She does bring him the spatulas, and Fred at this point asks what they're talking about, and she points out that she was talking about about girl stuff, about crushes, loves, and other things. But when she realizes Fred isn't really paying attention, it doesn't really seem to understand any of that. She merely lies and says they were talking about traps, which of course causes Fred to become happy and more cheerful, and he then proceeds to continue to work on the trap. But it's in any case at this point where Daphne actually sees George Avocados sneaking around behind some of the stalls, and does point out that obviously it seems like he's here, and that now it's time to actually get ready to set the trap for the Scarebear. But in any case, as they're doing that, Shaggy and Scooby actually walk out of the mystery machine, apparently having let the rest of the gang set up the trap. But they walk out with a bucket of fried chicken, and they're looking around, getting ready to join the festivities and a whole bunch of other things, when they discover a bomb on the premises, and immediately run to the rest of Mystery Incorporated, and after stuttering a little bit because they're not entirely sure how to put it into words, They then proceed to point out that they found a bomb, which of course causes the gang to panic, and Sheriff Stone, who is there, quickly panics because he realizes that now it might be the perfect time to actually leave. But of course, Mayor Nails stops him and points out that it may be time to actually defuse the bomb and also maybe arrest the person responsible for it. And of course, they immediately note George Avocado sneaking around behind the stalls, and Sheriff Stone. Fred immediately points him in the general direction. Sheriff Stone immediately arrests him and points out that he knows about the bomb. He knows that he knows that Avocados has that thing against Destroido Corporation, and points out that he's trying to stop him in his tracks before he sets the bomb off, and points out that obviously he thinks Avocados actually is wearing the Scarebear costume under his outfit, and proceeds to rip off Avocados' suit to reveal that he's just naked underneath, which of course causes Avocados to become very upset, pointing out that was a very expensive suit, and does point out that he had nothing to do with the Scarebear or the bomb, and doesn't know what anybody's talking about. I'm pointing out that he was merely there for the charity ball because that's just where he was supposed to be. He got an invitation to the charity ball, and he came. That's it. But in case at this point where they point out that if he wasn't the one who set the bomb, then who was? At which point the Scarebear immediately appears and starts terrorizing people and scaring them, and of course starts trying to scare off people out of the Destroido charity ball. But is at this point, and of course at this point where Fred comments that maybe the Scarebear isn't going to disarm the bomb after all. And the Scarebear hears them because he's trying to scare them as well, and quickly realizes that he wasn't the one who set the bomb. And then, which confuses the rest of the gang because they finally realize that he can talk. But of course, the Scarebear points out that obviously he didn't set the bomb, and then tells the gang that to sell them where the bomb is. And of course, Shaggy and Scooby, having seen the bomb, lead them directly to it, and point out that that's the bomb in question. And of course, they point out that obviously they need to figure out a way to actually disarm it. At which point, Fred reveals that he actually has the perfect way to actually disarm it, and goes to grab the spatulas from his trap, and does tell everybody that he's got this, and then proceeds to set off his trap, which then proceeds to send the use the spatulas to send the bomb flying out of the range of Destroido and anything else that the bomb would have destroyed, and onto Avocado's property, much to his chagrin. So, and of course with that, he winds up becoming very upset that his avocado farm just got blown up, and he leaves. He goes off to go. He grumbles about the fact that they've actually disarmed, that they've actually used the bomb to destroy his property, and he's not particularly happy with any of Mr. Incorporated, and he just leaves. At which point Daphne points out that now that they've actually disarmed the bomb, and since obviously the Scarebear isn't going to resist, they point out that now it might be time to actually unmask the Scarebear, and sure enough, they unmask him to discover that it actually is the security guard for Destroido Corporation, Benson Furman. And what we find out is that Benson points out that it isn't actually his real name, explaining that his real name is Benson Hammond. And when Fred asks him why he lied, he points out that obviously he couldn't actually sneak in. He actually just changed his name so that he can sneak onto the Destroido Corporation and find out some things and get them to get revenge for what they did to him. And when Daphne questions what happened to him, pointing out that obviously he seems very fine, he then proceeds to point out that actually he's not fine. As it turns out, he's actually not wearing a costume. He's actually covered head to toe in bear fur. And proceeds and explains that the only reason his head isn't covered as well is because he shaves every morning. And of course he then proceeds to explain how what exactly happened to him. And what we find out is that Destroido Corporation is that he actually bought a body wash unknowingly from Destroido Corporation. And points out that that he didn't realize it was a subsidiary of Destroido Corporation that made the body wash, and he bought it, pointing out that it was supposed to make him smell good so that he can finally get a date. But what we find out is that it's actually caused him to grow hair on every square inch of his body, and he had to run out of the date in a panic because obviously he turned into a large bear man right in front of her. But of course he he realizes very quickly that it actually ruined his appearance, and demands to know from Destroido Corporation what they were going to do to compensate for him. But they merely just handed him a check, a written apology, and Mr. E just mailed it to him and apologized to him, and just tried to pay him off. Which of course Benson didn't take lying down, so he immediately decided to take a job at Destroido Corporation after changing his name to do an investigation into the body wash, and discover that it was actually just a repurposed fertilizer that destroyed an entire town, and Destroido didn't even bother changing the recipe. So yeah, for that reason, he pointed out that he was actually trying to figure out how to bring down Destroido Corporation, and using the fact, and carried out a bit of vigilante justice to just kind of expose Destroido Corporation for what it really is. He was trying to bring down Destroido Corporation by revealing what he found at their own charity ball, thereby just exposing them in front of everybody and ruining what's left of their reputation. And he points out that he would have gotten away with it if the gang hadn't interfered. And of course, Fred points out that he actually feels kind of bad for actually ruining it, pointing out that he was obviously a victim, and obviously they point out that they didn't didn't realize that he was actually trying to do something good. They didn't realize that he was actually wearing a costume and for noble intentions. They just went full investigative mode, and that was that. And do point out that obviously Destroido does need to pay for what they did to him, pointing out that obviously being turned into a large bear man is kind of a problem. And of course he points out that what we find out is that obviously Sheriff Stone is more than happy to help Benson find any sort of legal justice, but points out that obviously Destroido has declared itself a sovereign nation, which again means that he can't arrest anybody for any of the things that they've done. So for those reasons, unfortunately, Destroido Corporation just kind of gets off scot-free. But of course, Sheriff Stone is praised for the fact that he actually was right on the money about the fact that Scarebear was somebody that worked at Destroido Corporation. And of course, they quickly find out that they need to actually find a way to actually get Benson the compensation that he so rightfully deserves. But of course, they do point out that obviously that also just leaves the question of who set the bomb. Because obviously Scarebear and Avocados didn't set the bomb, so that begs the question of who did. But what we find out is that was actually Mr. E and Professor Pericles. As it turns out, they were actually very desperate about the fact to actually take out Mr. Incorporated and set the bomb in the hopes that it would take them out. And Mr. E does point out that he was more than happy to destroy his own business if it meant taking out Mr. Incorporated so that they can actually find the piece of the Planispheric Disc. But that didn't wind up working out for them, and he points out that now they'll need to find other methods. And of course, it's at this point where Professor Pericles suggests that they send Brad and Judy to actually go and manipulate their son and see if they can find the pieces of the Planispheric Disc that they're missing that way. Pointing out that obviously, since Brad and Judy's son is the leader of the current Mr. Incorporated, that they should be more than up to the task. But does also question if they're willing to actually betray their only son, which of course points out that since nobody suspects it would be an obvious thing for them to do. So yeah, first and foremost, we got a villain who was completely in the right. As we find out, Scarebear was just trying to chase everybody off the Destroido property while he investigated. He was just trying to find a way to actually bring Destroido Corporation down from the inside, since obviously the normal methods of actually going in and using law enforcement to stake it out, that isn't going to work. It's a sovereign nation. It's a sovereign corporation. They can't do that. And I am curious if that isn't the thing. I don't think it's a thing. I know to an extent, corporations are effectively. They effectively can't be sued, at least in the legal sense, at least in the normal sense, because obviously you can't sue an individual if they're incorporated. Then it's legal. Then the corporation is legally a person. You can sue the corporation, but you can't individually sue the people behind it. So yeah, it enables a corporation to just split stuff up that way. If they get sued, they can split up the losses between everybody who works for the corporation. They can do it that way. But yeah, I don't think a sovereign corporation is really a thing. But if it is, that's kind of an interesting legal loophole. I don't think, because I'm pretty sure that that the legal system would prevent something like that from happening, considering we have monopolies and a whole bunch of other things. We have laws to prevent all of those different things. But I don't think this is a thing, but it is a little funny gag that they can't actually go into to arrest anybody on Destroido because it's technically a sovereign nation. They can't go in to do a thing with that. But in any case, I do find that interesting. But also, there's just the fact that this is the first time that the full gang has actually seen Mr. E in the flesh, and also confirms that he is indeed going to take drastic measures to try and break into the Destroido Corporation and steal and just kind of make sure the gang isn't in the picture anymore. So yeah, they're getting a little bit more drastic to try and steal the pieces of the Planesware disc away from the group. So yeah, I'm interested to see how that's going to come to a head in the next episode or several of the episodes going forward, because obviously that's a thing that the show is building to. Obviously, it's been building to the Planesware disc and its connection to Nibiru and a whole bunch of other things. So I'm curious to see what the whole Nibiru situation is and what that's going to do, because obviously that's what seems to be what the Planesware disc has been building to. I'm curious how that's going to work, and I'm curious how that's actually going to come about. But for the time being, yeah. Thank you guys so much for watching this review. If you enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter in the description below. Be sure to check out all of my links through Twitter as well. I have a card there. If you guys want to see that site, be sure to go check those out. Go check out all the things I've got there. I've got my Twitch, I've got my YouTube, I've got my Throne, I've got all my other things linked there, so just go check that out. Also, be sure to check out my Patreon in the description below as well. It does help support the show. It does help. It does help fund future projects. So if you want to see more things like Xenoblade Chronicles, Scooby-Doo in general, it's Cuphead, couple Binding of Isaac, a couple of other different things. But be sure to go check all those things out. And also, finally, if you want to see more content from me, then be sure to check out the videos linked in the end screen. The top video is the most recent one. It may or may not be this one. Whereas above, the least video I recommend to you based on what you've already seen from me. So if you want to try something new, or see more of what you would like, then be sure to check both of those videos out. But in any case, thank you guys so much for watching, and until next time, I will see you guys in the next video. Peace!